This is Fantology.
You may have heard of us.
All right, what's up, publishing industry? This is Steven, your host with Fantology Podcast. I have my lifelong friend Josh here with me, and we're talking about the book Yellowface by RF Kuang, which came out earlier this year and was quite the sensation, at least on Book Talk. And RF Kuang was on like the Time Top 100 list. Her career's really taken off. We've read all of her other books, and they've all been fantasy, and we've obviously covered that on Fantology. This is just a pure work of fiction, no fantasy elements to it. And usually that is not something we cover on the channel, but it's the end of the year and we read the book and feel like there's a good amount to talk about. So here we go into fiction.
Okay, yeah. And just a little, disclaimer up at the top. This book is called Yellowface. If you somehow haven't made that connection, it is because it deals with a lot of themes of racism, of a white woman, like culturally appropriating, basically taking over an Asian woman's identity in a lot of ways. I mean, without getting too much into spoilers, that's basically where it gets its name, though, is that's the general outline of the book. And we can give our spoiler-free thoughts and then our spoiler thoughts later on. But obviously, as two white men, we don't really have a ton to say in terms of the discrimination based on racism in terms of like actual personal experience with it. So take what we have to say, with that theme of the book with a grain of salt, but it is a major theme of the book, so we're going to be discussing it.
Yeah, so obviously we're going to come at it from our perspective, and if you're not interested in that, I think that's totally fair, because maybe you could just say, stay in your lane, and I don't know. I mean, I feel like we enjoyed the book enough, and we review books, so here we go. We'll see how it goes.
Nice. Yeah. So, spoiler free thoughts, I guess we should start with.
Yeah. Let's do that.
Yeah. So, some background for me. I actually bounced off Poppy War. I read Poppy War, but I didn't read I bounced off the second book pretty early on into it.
Okay.
So I actually haven't finished that.
Oh, really? Then, you never did?
No, I mean to, but I think
come
I
on,
read
Josh.
it.
And in the primer, I taled about how big of fans we are.
I didn't want to correct you. I didn't want to correct you up at the top.
Okay.
But
noted.
But I think it is kind of interesting because it was a little bit too dark for me. I think I read it in between the first and second trilogy of Abercrombie's work. So I was just kind of a lot of dark books. And Abercrombie, there's like a lot of hopeful undertones in some ways. There wasn't really, at least up through like the first and second half of the second book of that trilogy. I don't know. It just got to be a lot for me. So I DNF'd it.
I don't know how much I would agree with hopeful undertones in Abercrombie's books, but at least there's like humor and like some lightheartedness.
Maybe that's what I would say. There's some hopefulness. I don't know.
Some, not a lot.
Okay. Discussion for another time.
Josh is quite the optimist. Okay, yeah.
Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is I bounced off of Poppy War, and then but I think that I put Babel as my top book of 2022. So I think anyway. Now that
was a huge hit last year.
I really liked it. So so my kind of experience with Rebecca Kuang has been kind of I don't want to say all over the place, because I did think Poppy War was like well written and a good book. I'm not saying it was bad. I just, for me at the time I was reading it, I DNF'd it. Anyway, so I came into this book a little bit like not sure what I was going to think of it.
Yeah, I'd say probably the same. I guess I'm a bigger fan of her previous books than you were, and obviously this is a different genre. We have read like other genres, like to make sure people understand that, but we mostly do fantasy on the channel, and so it was kind of fun to read something different. And also, like, as far as non-spoiler thoughts, this book reads really quickly and is really compelling and somewhat addicting. Like, a lot of times when I'm listening to books, I kind of plan the listening around other things that I'm doing, so I'm not just like only sitting there and listening. But I did listen to this audiobook, And I was like so into it that there were times where I just kind of like wanted to sit there and listen and hear what happened next.
Interesting.
You didn't feel the same?
Uh, yes and no. For me, the book started stronger than it finished. And obviously we'll get into spoilers, but I think around the halfway point, I kind of lost a lot of interest in it, if that makes
Mm,
sense. Um, and so I have definite reasons for that. But I don't want to get into them until the spoiler section. Um,
I feel like
but
I know what you're gonna say, and I think if it's what I'm thinking, I do agree. There was kind of a bit of a slog slash like real repetitive part in about the middle that I was like, okay, let's get on with the story because I was really interested in the story and seeing what happened with the whole because it's a very compelling and interesting situation.
mhm. Yeah, I guess that's how I want to get into. I think it starts off interesting, and then I think it overplays its hand almost, and
Mm.
and I think we can get into that more when we do talk about spoilers. But I do agree, largely it is a very fast-paced story. The pacing is good, in a lot of ways. It's short. I mean, I'm not sure page count, but I think it was like what 10 hours or so long,
Yeah, I think it's
the
like under
audiobook.
300, so
Yeah,
really
so
short for what we usually read.
yeah, for sure. So
And it's got some interesting themes. Like certainly this will be discussed a lot across social media and a lot of different for a lot of different reasons. Heavy themes of race, obviously, heavy themes of social media and just like the publishing industry in general. And it kind of, made me wonder what things are really like how much of this situation that's portrayed, like how real is this to how things go down in the publishing industry. I assume some is real, some is obviously, going to be exaggerated for effect. But I mean, I'm guessing kind of like at the top of the charts where the fictional book in Yellowface ends up going, there's probably a ton of this. And I've always thought authors are in an interesting position because they are almost like social media celebrities when they put their names on books and lots of people read the books and want to discuss the books, but they're not celebrities in the same way that, like athletes or actors and actresses are
mm,
because, they're, well, I mean, for the most part, like they're
I
not
think it is a
super,
lot
super
small.
highly paid. Like some are,
Yeah,
but
that's
it's,
true.
there's the comparative earnings to the, tens, hundreds of $1 million contracts that athletes get and whatever actors and actresses are paid. Again, probably similar. Like in Hollywood, the top get a lot, and everyone else kind of gets a medium amount. But I just think that authors are interesting because there's a few that probably kind of make it big, and then everyone else is kind of floating around and their names are out there, and everyone wants to discuss them in social media. But I think they just kind of like sit in their houses and write books for the most part. Like
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's kind of like
I
an
do agree with that.
different type of celebrity.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Um, yeah, I think that they are a lot bigger on internet and like, and even within like the kind of bookish community, um, there's like such different like subcultures like based on like Goodreads, like there's people that make their
Mhm.
living on Goodreads basically. Like if they're and then there's people that make their living on Twitter basically as an author, like marketing through Twitter, marketing through Goodreads, marketing on TikTok, marketing on YouTube. You know what I mean? Like, so
Mhm.
it really is, yeah, it is interesting. And as we were reading this, there's the whole drama. I had to Google the name with like Kate Corain or something about how she was leaving bad
Yeah.
reviews on other first time authors' books and stuff like that. So it was kind of interesting to read while this real life drama was going on. But it also, for me, kind of pointed out how accurate and outlandish some parts of this book were. Like how accurate that this person, Kate Corin, not trying to defend what she did at all, but like her entire career was basically destroyed by like one dumb decision that was like way less dumb than the decisions that the character in this book makes. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like
Right.
way less harmful, I should say, and I guess in a lot of ways, like um, they're not really similar, but I would say that that the leaving bad comments on people's uh you know other people's books is like pretty bad and like a dumb thing to lie about and like deserves some scorn, but like
Hmm.
her
I would
entire
say
career
it's objectively like less bad than
yeah
what happens in this
than what
book.
happens in this book. Yeah. So
Yeah.
anyway, I'm not like trying to get into the position where I'm like defending what this person did, but like also it does show how fast like her career just like blew up, and like she's not going to be an author anymore because of
Hmm.
a dumb decision that she made when she was breaking into the industry, which is largely what this book is about. So I did think it was an interesting comparison.
Yeah, and I guess we're kind of getting into spoilers, so we'll just say that that's happening now. If you haven't read Yellowface, that sounds like I liked it a little bit more than Josh. I think it's something that you can easily get through, and there's lots of interesting ideas. But maybe some things to think about for yourself and not just like take it all at face value.
Nice. Okay. Get into
Yeah.
spoilers.
Yeah. So, which part of the book kind of lost it for you? Was it the part where she gets real deep into social media and it kind of slogs around for a while she's just like going in Twitter loops and doom scrolling?
Yeah, pretty much. I think what really when it really lost it is that part of the book where it makes it abundantly clear that she um doesn't really have any remorse for what she did, and that she just becomes a worse and worse person over it. I
Hmm.
thought it got a lot less compelling for me when she ended up just being a really bad person, I guess. Um,
Like it could have been. So that is not something specifically that I thought of, but I kind of agree with what you're saying now. For me, I think the book like could have been so much more interesting if a few angles of the characters were explored more.
mhm.
Like for June, specifically what you just said, I think is a good call out. Like she there is really like and not that like she needs to be defensible, but there is nothing that you could possibly say by the end that like makes it okay. But she could have been like, yeah, showed some remorse or like had some shreds of being a good person. And maybe that would have been a more compelling story.
Yeah.
But that's just like not there at all. Uh, and maybe that's kind of like what we're going for here. I think the point of the whole thing is that Athena's work is stolen, right? And she's just like the silent voice, and she kind of represents, like Asian American authors at times, right? And I'm assuming that's what RF Kuang is going for in this story. And I can assume that because I kind of scrolled through some posts that she made, and she said something to that effect. So I hope that I'm accurately representing that.
Mhm.
But I do think the story could have been more interesting if June was more balanced, and also if Athena was more balanced. I feel like Athena could have been explored more because I don't know, like what am I supposed to think about Athena? Because she was kind of developed a little bit, and like she was like this kind of raised, privileged, snotty, rude, up and coming author. But at the same time, like we obviously feel really bad for her because she died and her work was stolen. But at the end of the book, like I don't really know. Like I feel like that could have been built out more, her background.
Yeah. So a few kind of thoughts and a little bit of story time from Josh on this one. I think I've told you the story before, Sam. I don't know if I've ever shared it publicly, but
Okay.
there's one time when I was it was when I was serving a mission, and we were walking down the street, and we look over and we see this guy that had been like passed out, or that was passed out on his lawn. And so we go over and make sure he's okay, and he's like not okay. He's clear. He's like unconscious. So we call emergency services, and and I start CPR. We like get his tongue cleared out. Anyway, he really sad. He ends up dying while we were there, like while we were giving him CPR, and like it was really traumatic. Like you know, and like I don't. While we were there, like his family, somebody from his family like pulled up and like like I didn't even talk to them. We just like left once the emergency services got there, and they didn't ask us any questions. It was kind of strange, but like I just like walked, like was in a haze for like the rest of the day, and I didn't know this person at all. It would be like, I'm sure, way worse if it were a friend, right? So
Hmm.
like looking back like on that experience, I think it was like depicted pretty accurately, and like you could totally do something that you would never ever consider doing in a moment like that. At least like I could see myself like doing something that I would never like. If you were to tell me that I would just like walk away from somebody who is just like grieving, and now the person will like never get the story of how the person died because like I left without thinking about talking to them, like that's a pretty objectively like kind of immoral thing to do, right? I wouldn't think that I would be the type of person that would do that, and I
Hmm.
did. And like, you know what I mean? And so the fact that she like kind of went through this like traumatic experience and took this manuscript, I think it's like believable. And so it started off like, and maybe that's it's unfair for me to like put this kind of like similarly like personal experience that I went through like on this book and then build my foundation for it, my opinions off of it. Like it's pretty unique, but nonetheless, that's like the experience I had reading it. And so
Okay.
like it
So I
started
mean,
off,
you felt like there was some feeling of
yeah,
shock
some feeling of
around, yeah.
right, like some feeling of believability that like in
Hmm.
the hours and even days after that she like kind of went through this whole initial process, that was like super, super compelling to me. Um, and I really liked it. And then it just like and even up through like sending off the manuscript and like maybe even like publishing the initial book, I think like that's like somewhat justifiable just based on like the severe like shock and like trauma that she went through.
Hmm.
But then like continuing to like double down and like deluding yourself into thinking that what she did was okay, it just like lost me. You know what I mean? And then like being so self-righteous about it, like if you just came forward and you're like, you know, like there's so many times for her to come clean and like say, hey, I did this, it was dumb. This, here's the original work that she did. Here's the work that I did to improve or to finish it off. You know, tell that to the publisher, tell that to the world. I think she would like that's I think a lot of people would understand a situation like that. Instead, it just kind of like took the I don't know if I want to say like laziest route, but like it just continued to make her a worse and worse person to where at that by the ending of the book, you just didn't she had no redeeming qualities.
Mm. I think, I mean, I feel like the book presents reasons for what she did at each step. And like you said, through the first bit where she gets the manuscript and she writes and she feels like, this is her calling or whatever to finish the book. And she's like legitimately not thinking about what's going to happen next. And she publishes it and all of that. Like, yeah, I agree. I felt like along the way, you're kind of wondering, like, okay, where's this going to go? Like, this is obviously getting kind of icky, but at the same time, like, she's in this weird state and like maybe it kind of makes sense. I don't know. But and then yeah, she just totally becomes a very bad person. But it's almost like the nature of the publishing industry and the career that she's in, like that was kind of what pushed her at each moment. Like she thought, this is my way, and she'd been rejected for all those years before. And she felt like if she came clean, then she would blow it again and she would have nothing. And like that was her whole life, basically, was her fame, her appeal, her status as a writer, and she would do anything to not lose that.
Yeah, I get that, and like I think that the book does do a good job of like making you believe that that was her only like priority in life. But the point is that that made her a bad person with not really any redeeming qualities, right?
Mm,
Like, and at times you're right. She was trying to justify that it was because of the publishing industry, because of these maybe systemic factors that like she wasn't able to get into having the career that she wanted. But
mm,
at the same time, they make it look like she could have maybe trucked along being like a like we kind of an author like we talked about at the beginning where maybe they never make it huge but they're able to maybe not have a day job or at least have like a decent side income
mm,
and and had it be a fulfilling part of her life instead of a part of her life that took over and consumed her and made her, and into a terrible person.
Yeah, every step she tried to justify it, and each time that happened, as the reader, you're feeling worse and worse about this until finally, like, there is nothing you can possibly say. And I think maybe that point comes for at a different spot for different readers. I don't remember exactly when I was feeling that way, but yeah, she gets very consumed in it. The whole part where she's just like going around in social media, doom scrolling and trying to continually cover things up and all that. Like that lost me a bit. I thought it was just
Mhm.
I don't know how to
But
describe
no,
it.
it just made you realize, for me, that part, that she wasn't interested in being a good person. She was
Yeah,
only interested in getting away with it.
she was basically just a self-interested psychopath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. Like, and that's what that part of the book really made me realize. And then nothing redeemed it, to the point where at the very end she's
Mhm.
like talking about, like, oh, how am I gonna, you know, spin this into making this other person that also might
Yeah.
have been a little bit psychopath, a little bit of a psycho, you know,
Right,
into
right, right.
into an equal villain as me. You know what I mean? And
Mm.
that was how the book ended. And it's like there's no self-reflection of like, maybe I should just go be an accountant. They don't care. Like if I go get my accounting degree, a firm's gonna hire me and I can make a
Right.
perfectly good living wage as an accountant because they won't give a crap that I was a author. That maybe I'm sure that it might be a little bit harder because she did become a household name kind of there, but like she could go do perfectly fine in a field that was not related to publishing. And she seemed like a smart enough person to be able to do that.
Yeah. I think maybe what both of us may be missing is some compulsory, yeah, desire to become an author and like get your name out there and put it on a book and like bestow the world with your ideas. It sounds like, I mean, it definitely sounds like Rebecca Kwong is kind of writing from that perspective, and maybe that's her background and that's what she's seen in interacting with a bunch of authors in the industry. So yeah, the fact that like neither one of us is like super passionate, career driven in that way, maybe it seems like really weird that she wouldn't just kind of like back it off after long enough and become, a redeemable person in some way rather than fully commit to this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess. And obviously that just isn't the direction that she
Yeah,
went with the character.
but
Um,
I mean, I think there's enough interesting ideas here where maybe the book about the appropriation, right? The cultural appropriation of the work and all that. Like those are really interesting ideas. Maybe it would have been more interesting if the villain was not a psychopath and instead was kind of like a normal-ish
yeah,
person, right? And then we have to maybe like think about the consequences of,
right.
we've still got this race issue, but this person is like has some sympathy for what's going on, is like realizing they've made a mistake, but at the same time, like we've got to still deal with this problem of like, okay, this person's like kind of good, but they've made this horrible mistake, and it's like this
Yeah,
this big cultural racial thing. Like, how do we justify this? And maybe that's a more interesting story than this person's a psycho and this is terrible and we should never do this. Like,
exactly.
obviously, we should never
Yeah.
do this.
And I think that that's what the story I thought we were getting for the first half of the book.
Mm.
Is the story of a good person, or at least like a person who's trying to be good that makes some mistakes. Kind of the story I thought we were getting in the first half of the book was, oh, what was that one Beatles movie where the person wakes up and the world had never heard of the Beatles, and he like performs all
Um,
their songs. Anyway,
and what's the name? It's a lyric of it's
yesterday.
a lyric
Oh,
either lyric. Yeah, yesterday.
is it yesterday?
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, that's the story I thought we were getting, right? And that movie, I feel like in terms of the publishing and profiting off of somebody else's works, I think that movie explored those themes in a much better way. And it's been like 5 years since I've seen that movie or whenever it came out. I
Mm.
watched it when it came out and haven't gone back since. But like I feel like that movie kind of explored those themes in kind of a more realistic, well, I don't know if realistic is the right word, but a better way, a more
More
enjoyable way.
uplifting. I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah,
Um,
more lighthearted and yeah.
yeah. So I thought that that's the story we were getting, and then it wasn't. It was just a story of a bad racist person who didn't have any qualms uh, about screwing other people over,
Hmm.
um, getting her comeuppance.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, like
eh,
maybe themes of racism are more interesting to explore when it's like two kind of good people that get into a situation, like because there's a lot of good people in the world that deal with racism, right, in different ways. And like I think those are more interesting conversations we could
yeah.
be having, kind of. So maybe we're ready for like a next level conversation of like we're still good people and we have kind of underlying racism things that we need to deal with.
Um, yeah. So let me say
I
one
don't know
thing.
if I said that well, but
No,
yeah.
I get what you mean. So two thoughts on that. One is that I think Rebecca Kwong explored this even better in Babel, where these people that thought that they weren't
Yeah,
racist had to deal with confronting that they did have these racist tendencies and prejudices.
right.
That book explored that theme a lot in a lot better way, I feel like, than this book did. Um, yeah, and even some of those characters, I don't want to spoil that book, but even some of those characters did end up being bad people. But um, I don't want to spoil that. Just go read that book. I feel like it handled
Hmm.
these themes in a better way. Um, Having said that, I was watching a review by, let me give the with Cindy, it looks like is the YouTuber's name, who is I think Asian American and I think in the publishing industry as well. And I think she was actually referenced kind of vaguely in the
Oh no,
book.
I watched
Yeah,
this review as
you
well.
watched this
Yeah.
review,
Uh-huh.
but she did go through. And do you watch that part of the video where she went through and just pulled out like five or six of the like super kind of racist things that
Hmm.
the narrator or that Junie had said, Junie, anyway,
June.
had said,
Yeah.
June had said, and like it did even catch me off guard of being like, I don't remember that sounding as racist when it happened in the book. You know what I mean? But then when you're like
Hmm.
confronted with it like over and over and over, are like, dang, that she was a really bad and racist person.
Yeah.
Um, and so even for me, just like knowing that that's what that book is about and trying to be aware of it, um,
No,
I
I yeah, I
didn't
think
catch
it
them. Yeah.
I agree with that. I think I had a similar experience, and I agree that that is a little eye-opening to realize like, you know, this situation is like maybe way worse than I first realized when I was reading through it. And that probably does kind of, shed a light on where we're coming from. Uh so yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Um, Plot wise, uh, I also just it kind of lost some steam for me. And what I was referring at the very beginning is I kind of stopped caring that she was going to get busted when I realized that she was a bad person. I was rooting for it, and I don't know if that's what I wanted to feel. I kind
Hmm.
of wanted to feel like I kind of was hoping she would get away with it, which is
It's
kind of
kind
how I
of like,
was the first half
yeah,
of the book.
you're kind of
Yeah,
like wanting it to be resolved for her good somehow, because almost like, the main character, you always kind of cheer for the main character. Like even in the Mark Lawrence books, when Jorg is like the worst person in the world, you have this like weird compulsion to like hope that things work out well for him. And
yeah,
it's almost like you spend time in someone's head enough and you cheer for them even if they're horrible.
yeah. And so that's how it was for maybe the first half of this book. And then I was just like, no, just screw it. I want this person to get caught. You know what I mean? I want them to get all these bad things happening to them.
Uh,
And so that kind of took away some of the what's the word? Like the uh the, I just lost the word, but like the excitement of seeing if she's going to get away with it or not. I just wanted
uh-huh.
her to get caught and see bad things happen to her after after a certain point.
So you weren't necessarily like super invested in the thematic payoff at the end because you're just like, okay, I've got it 3/4 of the way through. Let's just see what happens here.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Mm, I think that's fair. I think another interesting thing that, and when I was saying I feel like Athena could have been developed more, and this gets pointed out a lot in that review that you mentioned, was I feel like they also really could have explored more of like the socioeconomic differences and backgrounds of these two women, and like the privilege that Athena came from her education and background and money, and how easily she was able to rocket up the list. And obviously, she had other obstacles that are very heavily explored, but it just kind of like touches on these differences where June didn't really have very much and Athena had a ton, and Athena was probably more naturally talented as well. But I feel like the book also could have been more interesting if it went into more of these, this idea of like some authors that make it are the ones that are set up to succeed. And the reasons why are they're super well educated and they come from backgrounds that just like naturally mean that they have more time to write because they don't have to worry about putting food on the table. Like
Yeah.
that would be interesting to hear more about, but that was just like briefly touched on. And June's kind of mad about it every now and then, but it's never really a big
And
thing.
even kind of undercut by the fact that June was still like a fairly privileged position. Like I think it mentioned that her family like was able to pay for a lot of her education at like what was it, Yale that she went to, or Stanford?
Yeah, I don't remember which school, but yeah,
Anyway,
like June was
like
also like,
but
middle
if you're
class
it
solidly.
no, we have this debate all the time. If your family is paying for your education
Well,
in
okay,
Ivy
like
League
upper
school,
middle class.
if your family is paying for an education in Ivy League school, you're upper class. If
Is
they're
that
paying,
was that they were paying for her? That's what
I
it
think it
was.
said that she had that I think it made a
Okay.
comment that like between saving money for her to go to pay for her time at Yale and such,
Hmm.
they didn't have a lot of
I remember
money. Like,
she had student debt though. She
oh,
for
did
sure had
she?
student debt
Okay. Oh
because
yeah, she did. She
after
did.
getting the money like
You're
from
right.
her book, like she wrote off
Yeah.
all of her student debt. So yeah,
Yeah.
maybe they contribute to I don't remember the details. But yeah, like she is certainly coming from
Yeah.
a good position, but
Yeah. At least
not
middle class
like
to upper middle class.
yeah, but not,
Yeah.
super upper levels that Athena was
Yeah,
coming from.
exactly. She's not going around at going to different the best boarding schools across the world.
Hmm.
But that's what I mean. Like that kind of seems like a weird way to play. Like if you're going to look at it through that lens, because it's like you're comparing like one like kind of like fairly privileged person to like another extremely privileged person. You know what I mean? It's like would it be would it be a better comparison to compare somebody that's having to work a job to support their family while they're in high school because their parents got sick and couldn't work, you know what I mean? And so
Hmm.
they I don't know, so the only way that they were found out was by a college professor seeing like a creative writing sample that they submitted, and then that's how they got discovered, you know what I mean? Like that would be a more interesting dynamic if you're going to examine like the socioeconomic um, impact versus privileged to more privileged, I guess.
Yeah, it just never really becomes a big thing, but it feels
Yeah,
like it should be.
feels like it could be,
Yeah.
but maybe again you're not focusing on it if you're coming from Junie's perspective, because like you're like maybe in the back of your mind that you actually did have enough opportunities to make it
Mm.
and you just weren't talented enough, you know.
Seems like June is a crappy enough person where like she would take every little slight and just, make it
Yeah,
into a huge thing.
yeah, okay,
I mean, it gets touched on, but it's not, it just
yeah.
feels like it feels like for the character June is, she should have made it into a bigger thing.
And I don't even feel like it's the money aspect that gets touched on. It's more of like the cosmopolitan, like upper classness that gets touched on versus like the actual
Mm,
opportunities that like versus the actual
yeah.
nitty gritty.
Like she just kind of felt like she never had the opportunities and she didn't really ever belong in the
Yeah,
top tier of all these, snooty writers, basically.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there were a lot of interesting things. I thought the way the publishing industry was explored was really interesting. Obviously, there are, it gets into a lot of different slights that authors of minority backgrounds go through. And I thought that was really, kind of eye-opening and interesting to see like people, and it really hammered this theme home of, a lot of times people say, because of equal opportunity laws and et cetera, like we see more minority things being pushed, blah, blah, blah. right? And like what a fallacy that is, because at the end of the day, it's like, okay, we need the one minority book this month to push, right? And so I enjoyed seeing that highlighted. I think that is something that I'm always kind of annoyed at hearing about, people complaining, like, honestly, like, really, this like anti-racism whatever card that people like to play, that's really stupid. And I'm glad that that was, really kind of blown up in this book. I like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's kind of like the Black History Month when every other month is White History Month.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And for whatever reason, a lot of white people focus in on this and feel like they're like being attacked for some reason because other
Yeah.
minorities are being highlighted. And it's just the dumbest thing. And, before, when I said like, oh, I think everyone understands racism's bad, I feel like a lot of people listening that are minorities would be like, I don't feel that way. And, that's probably true, because I think like at a surface level, people say that, but do they really like
Well,
understand that?
and that's what
Not
this book
really.
does
Yeah.
do well is like, would June would not say that she was racist, right?
Right.
She would be like,
Right.
absolutely, I'm not racist. I voted for Joe Biden, or wait, what was
Yeah.
I voted for Hillary? Was Biden? I forget when this
I feel like
what
she said I feel like she
presidential.
said
I
Biden.
feel
I
like
don't
she
know.
said
Maybe
Biden too,
maybe she said Obama. I don't know.
or Clinton or something. Anyway, she would be like, "Oh, I voted. I'm a Democrat. I
Hmm.
donate to anti-racism." Like, or she had her like
Right. Yeah.
charity
She
that
does
she
her
was
like
donating
little
to.
token appearances
Yeah,
that,
uh,
she like tries. Yeah.
and she knows what to say. Like there is some valid input of like, okay, well, why can't a white person write about these aspects of history, right? Like that is like a valid conversation to have. Like, should you be able to approach a subject, um, or should you not be able to approach a subject because you're white? Like, obviously, and that's another interesting conversation, you know. But
Hmm.
the fact is that she deludes herself into thinking like, oh, well, I can't like I should be able to do this even though I'm white, versus I didn't have the ability to do it and I had to steal from somebody that had that ability because of
Right.
their background. You know what I mean? And she never like reconciles herself that with herself, that like she was not able to come up with the story because she did not have the experiences necessary to come up with that story. And it would almost require somebody like an Asian person that has had those experiences to come up with that story, you know. Um, and she never like gets that through her head, I guess. Um, and just instead falls back on the line of like, oh well,
Hmm.
should a white person be excluded from being able to tell whatever story, be able to tell a story just because they're white? And it's like that's such a shallow way of examining it, but that's the only way she was like that the character was able to examine it throughout the story.
Yeah, but like you say, it is an interesting discussion to have. Should
Like,
those stories only be told
yeah,
by those who are, have like the own voices?
like
Um,
I'm sure if like a white person went and married somebody that was Asian, or like immersed herself into like an Asian culture, and then like found out about this tragedy and then wrote a story about it, and had seen all these like the way that it had affected these communities throughout history, throughout the last 100 years or 80 years, then they would then and wrote an amazing story about it, then I don't think people would have a problem with it. But she didn't do that. She just stole somebody's work and passed it off as her own,
right,
and couldn't
right.
get that through her head of like
And she would say
that
things
was,
like, "Oh, I did all my research," and
yeah, you read like Wikipedia
she
articles for a
felt like
couple of
she
weeks.
worked really hard on it because she did all the editing and she took the un the unfinished things and turned it into a story, and like thus it was hers. And
But like, yeah,
yeah.
and ghostwriters do that all the time, right? Like, and that's like a semi-valid. I mean, I know people have their issues with ghostwriters, but like, I don't think many people think it's like a morally bad thing to do. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like, if anything, they would say that the ghostwriter deserves more credit than they generally get. But like, she could have said, "Hey, I ghost wrote the rest of Athena Lou's story. Let's publish it under her name and give me like she'll still make a ton of money from it." She could have easily
Yeah.
done that, and like nobody would have had an issue. I don't think people have had an issue with
Yeah.
it, but
I wonder if that would have been as compelling of a fictional story to read.
no, it wouldn't have been. But like,
Right.
if we're going on like some mature ways to handle these type of subjects, then like there are ways that like a not self-absorbed racist person could have handled that situation that would have made it okay, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, obviously, the
Yeah.
story really gets legs once she becomes super self-absorbed and continues to try to run the scam.
But
And
but that's what I mean. That's kind of when it lost me a little bit, because that's when I stopped caring about her
mm,
getting caught. So I don't know if for me, I feel like it would have been more compelling had she continued to be made out to be a somewhat uh likable character.
right, so like if at some point she did own up to it and then like something else happened and we had to kind of decide what we thought of her, and like maybe up until the end it remains kind of ambiguous and it's like what do
Yeah, like
we what do
maybe
we
maybe
make of
she
this?
maybe she did come clean to her agent or her publisher, and then they like pressure her into not going public with it because
Hmm.
they want the money too. And then so she, I mean, like I just feel like something more to make her a
Yeah,
little bit more, make me care about her a little bit more
right, right.
would have kept that intensity that I felt at the beginning of the story going.
Yeah, like maybe if by the end of the story I finish it and I'm kind of like on the fence, like, obviously was done at the face value was bad, but she like seems to be somewhat of a good person and she's like trying to do these things, and I come away from it and I'm like not really sure. And then I go back and watch a YouTube video breakdown where it like outlines all the racist things. And then I'm like, oh, like holy crap, like this is actually really, really bad. And like I didn't even realize how bad it was. And like, that maybe makes me reflect more as a person. And we talked about like how we did that a little bit, but at the same time, by the time the book was over, it was so obvious that this was bad that like, you know,
It's
it's
kind of
not
like
quite as powerful.
it's kind of like Breaking Bad, where I haven't rewatched it, but I've kind of heard this experience from a lot of people that rewatch it. Like when you like for the first while, the first time you watch Breaking Bad, you're like rooting for Walter White and you're like, hoping he gets away with it. But then
Hmm.
when you go back on a rewatch and watch it, you're just like, no, this guy is a terrible person. Like from the start, he is a bad person.
Hmm.
you know. But with that perspective, you're able to like see all the terrible things that he does from the
Hmm.
beginning. Um, and maybe had it been a little bit more like that, I don't know. It could,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's almost like we're saying if June was more of an anti-hero rather than a straight up villain,
Mm,
it would be, and maybe she still is a villain, but she's more like masked as an anti-hero, right?
yeah,
And so you don't realize how villainous she is until a reread or until, really thinking about it,
yeah.
rather than, she's a straight up villain. Like,
Which again, Babel
yeah,
does this really, really well. Like,
right,
yeah.
right.
So
Yeah.
it's almost like Rebecca Kuang wrote this really, really well in Babel, and then it was like, huh, I want to explore these similar
Hmm.
themes in a more accessible format, and wrote this. I'm sure that's not what happened, but it's kind of what it seems like to me.
Yeah. I'll say other things to mention. The prose itself and the writing is really
Oh, top
good.
notch. Yeah.
I mean, as I was reading, I just felt like, I don't often read a book where I'm like, this is gonna sound really conceited. I don't often read a book where I'm like, this person's just like way smarter than I am. Like sometimes I'll read them like, dang, like this person's really good. Like they right. And more intelligent than I am or whatever. But this time I was like, obviously she's just like just way clever, way more clever, way smarter with everything she's doing. And maybe that was part of the reason why I kind of end it a little frustrated because I just feel like she's capable of a lot more as far as hard hitting themes. And like obviously we see what was attempted and what is largely a successful fulfillment of what she's trying to do, but I think we both feel like it could have been more subtle, a little stronger at the end if some of these adjustments were made. But as you're reading through it, you're like, dang, like this Rebecca Kwong has the talent to do any of this stuff because she's obviously a fantastic writer.
Mhm. And it is hard because what might be subtle to somebody might be blaringly obvious to others first, and might not be a
Yeah,
big deal at all to
yeah,
yet others. You know what I mean? And so that is a hard line to walk. So she did a good job. I don't,
yeah. Especially with themes of racism, obviously people are coming at that from a lot of different backgrounds.
Mhm.
So our experience, your experience is different than my experience, which is different than lots of other experiences. So
Yeah. Mm.
yeah, obviously a tough thing to do. But yeah, I do agree with you that I think Babel did a better job. And that obviously illustrates that maybe this one also could have been a little
Yeah.
harder hitting. Yeah.
And Babel had a much bigger cast of characters that were able to demonstrate like different things, like the
Right.
racism. I again, I go read Babel because I still think that that's like a top-notch book that explores some of these themes in a better way. But it had a lot more characters. Some of them could be racist in these ways, others were racist in these ways, and yet others were had other issues. You know what I mean? So I think that this book, with the way it was structured, the one person viewpoint, the how fast it was, it couldn't get into all that. And so instead it took more of a surface level approach, which is fine in some ways, but disappointing in others.
Mm-hmm. And it's simple, but it almost felt like it was Rebecca Kwong's like frustration with the publishing industry and just different themes that she's getting into, right? And I think that's interesting to read,
Yeah.
but yeah, like maybe it could have been a little more subtle, couched a little bit more in some, I don't know, additional characters, or like it was just a very, straightforward story, and that's all it was meant to be. And obviously it was not, the same level of intricacy that we got in, or length, that we got in Babel, which I think we're both gonna say was a better book.
Yeah. The last thing, what did you think about it as a critique? We haven't talked about this too much, but of the publishing industry as a whole. Like, I read a bunch of like, oh, it's a hard hitting look at the publishing industry and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. What did you think of that?
I mean, I don't know because I have no experience with the
Yeah.
publishing industry, but it sure seems like this is a very crappy experience that,
Mhm.
I mean, obviously brought upon herself, by June, right? However, like it it really seems like a crappy career to be in if you
Yeah.
publish a book and are like always looking over your shoulder to what internet troll is going to tear you apart. That really sucks no matter what book you're publishing. And I hope authors don't feel like that as much as we saw here. And maybe part of that was because of just how self-absorbed and psychotic the main character was, and because of how guilty she felt over this and was like disguising it all. Maybe that's why that was such a focus. But I really hope publishing a book is not this terrible of an experience for the average author.
It kind of sounds like it is though. Honestly, for people that have gone self-published, like I don't know, hearing all of Sanderson's stories about how like we took that class a few times,
Mm-hmm.
and you can go watch it on YouTube, but where he does talk about setting some expectations if you try and go the traditional publishing route. And
Well, I mean, as far as the money involved, like yeah, I think we've heard enough about that to understand, but I'm just talking about from a job satisfaction slash
yeah,
emotional health perspective. Like, I really hope that that is just unique to the circumstances of this story, and the average author isn't going through that. But maybe that's part of the critique, of the publishing industry as far as how they handle, authors of race, right? Like maybe that is what we're getting into a bit, where I mean, obviously there are a lot of internet trolls that are going to come after authors who try to represent anything that's not white. Like, I would not be surprised. Like, I'm sure that happens a lot. I'm sure people deal with that. But and that's why I said earlier, like I think being an author is an interesting career because you're kind of putting yourself out there and you're like a name and a celebrity and a person, but at the same time, you're just writing books and like you're taking home a modest salary. And so it's interesting to think that internet trolls are really going to come after you as hard as they do, but I'm sure they do. I mean, we've seen people come after us and we just like review books and we don't even like do anything that interesting.
yeah, yeah. It is true, and I think it is easy to say like just ignore it, and which I think we hardly ever get super mean comments or anything.
Hmm.
you have a few videos that we did on like the Wheel of Time that got a ton. And for me, it is easy to kind of ignore, but I'm not bombarded with them all day, every day. You know what I mean? It's like more discreet, like, oh, this week this video is popping off and people are upset about it.
Yeah,
By popping off, I mean like getting a couple thousand views compared to our
right,
normally
right.
100 views. You know what I mean? Like, um, so I don't
And
know.
yeah, I mean, a few points to that, like obviously the internet is an echo chamber and it's this very small segment that amplifies all kinds of voices, and you don't have to be qualified at all to go after someone, and that really sucks for people, for authors especially, I think, as they try to get their work out there. Two, what we're doing is just a small time hobby, and when people come after us, we're just like, yeah, whatever. Like we spent a few hours doing this, and if you don't like it, like I kind of understand that. Like we're obviously not professional. Like I kind of agree, like we're not always right about stuff, so you're valid to say that you think we're stupid or whatever. Like on some level, that's true. However, I think if you're an author and you
And
put your
yeah,
heart and soul into something,
yeah.
and especially, if you're writing about something that's got a lot of emotional weight behind it, like you're writing some representation of your background or getting
Mhm.
into themes that are really important to you, like race, or like I've talked about the book that I want to write one day, which I'm going to put a lot of themes of disability in, which I'm really passionate about because of my life experience. Like if I, I'm going to say, there's some similarities there. Like if I was a person of color and I put a book out there that was really, that had a lot of racial themes that were really close to me, if I ever get my book out there that has a lot of disability themes that are really close to me, and that, if people come after me for that, which honestly they would, because the internet is a terrible place and people are gonna do that, like that's really gonna be tough. And you can say, like you said, like you can tell people, oh, just don't pay attention, but that's really hard
Yeah,
to not pay attention to.
I guess. I guess. I think the thing is, she didn't. Again, going back to the characters in this book, she didn't try. Right? She gave into all of it. For the most part, there was that one night where she just got like drunk and turned off her phone, and that was like the most that she ever escaped from it.
Yeah,
But like, you can just uninstall Twitter and just not check. Like you can. Nobody's gonna recognize you. No, like when you're out on the street. She hadn't
yeah.
reached that level of fame, like,
Obviously there's ways to deal with it. Like
but
we
she
see a
didn't
lot of
even,
authors
yeah,
like tweet out their 1-star reviews and laugh about it. And
yeah.
I think
But
with like enough,
yeah,
mental health counseling, you can, deal with criticism and
the
negativity,
thing,
which will
yeah.
come.
And again, the thing is, she kind of reveled in it as a character. She, it took it. It was almost like validating for her,
Mhm.
and like in some perverse way to like have
Yeah, it
this.
was like she knew she was guilty and she knew she needed to be punished.
Yeah,
And so she was like seeking it out almost. I
right,
think that's a more interesting discussion
right.
as to what happened in the book. I think
Yeah,
on some level that is definitely the case. And that was, like we said, we wanted more subtle themes. I think that's something for
that was a
sure
subtle
that
thing. Yeah,
we could have talked about more.
yeah. Whereas I think if you're genuinely more passionate about something that's getting roasted online, or whatever, not even roasted, but like that have people critiquing it, then like you can go talk to a therapist about it, and you can be like, they can give you strategies for like, hey, this is how
Hmm.
you can disengage with it. And again, it just goes back to that she didn't want that because she's, a bad person, kind of
Right.
is my read of it, which might not be accurate, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, definitely some interesting things here. Hopefully we represented our thoughts well enough on some of these, touchy subjects. And if you feel that we didn't, maybe
Attack us in
give
the
us some,
comments. Give us a reason to turn off the YouTube comments or
or
notifications.
like, I don't know, nicely provide some critiques or like your experiences
Yeah.
to assist us in our quest to be more open-minded.
Yeah, again, shouting out that With Cindy channel. She gave a really good review of it. I think it's the
Yeah.
first. I think it's the first one that pops up when you like YouTube yellow Facebook review.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And shout out
So
Rebecca Kuang. She did a great job in a lot of aspects of the book, and is a great author. So
yeah.
yeah.
And she has announced some future books and is obviously, has a great career going, and I'm looking forward to her future stuff. it sounds like the next thing she's doing is a like decades to centuries long look at Chinese history, like from the Cultural Revolution up until the Bush years is how
Wow.
she's described it, and it's like through kind of the lens of one family. So you get to see how how things have progressed, and it's also apparently a fantasy book. So we're always
Always
happy to
down
see
for
that.
that. Always
Yeah,
down for that.
yeah, cool. Well,
Well,
thanks, Josh.
thanks, Stephen.
See you later.